Well, welcome students. We're really excited to have you guys as part of our second Mayborn Mentor virtual panel. My name is Trent Walters. I am one of the board members at the journalism school. Excited to be part of the education committee with Teresa Kuchner, who also I work with her in developing out programs like this to help connect students with folks in the industry, folks out in the working world that are doing what you all are studying to do while you're in school right now. And so what we do through these programs is try and connect those two groups so that you all can get a better perspective of what it's like out there in the real world, so to speak, what careers are like, what it may be like to do the thing that you're actually studying to do right now, and ask questions and connect with folks and really figure out what it's going to be like to do that thing that you're doing or that you're studying right now. So we're excited for these programs and glad to have you. Thanks so much for joining. And we've got an intimate group, so we're going to be able to ask some really good questions and get some really good feedback. Today, our session is going to be on crisis and crisis communication. So we've got several PR professionals here with us that have dealt in this particular area and have some really great expertise to provide you all on that side of the public relations business. So I think at the end of this, what I really love to see is that you kind of understand how to navigate this, call it delicate career path, if you will. But you can also see how helping a company through their crisis and their challenges can actually be a very rewarding profession. It may sound crazy and chaotic and stressful and whatnot, but there's some real reward in this side of the business, and that's what we want to kind of get out today. So excited to have our three panelists here with us. I'm glad when I reached out, they didn't say, what? They said, yes, we want to give back. All alums from UNT and all excited to be able to talk to you all about what they do. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, let you know a little bit more about who they are, a little bit of background on what they do on a day-to-day basis and their entree into the world of PR. And then we'll get started with several questions. So Kurt, why don't we start with you and then we'll go to Brian and then we'll go to Marvin after that.
Got it. Hi, everybody. My name is Kurt Watkins. I've been in the business for about 15 years. While at UNT, I was able to get some really great internships at Weber Shandwick and Fleishman Hillard, which are regarded as some of the pretty coolest agencies around in the country. Did the agency work for about 5 years, and then I went into the political world where I managed a few campaigns, worked as a press secretary for a major political party in DC. After I rode that train, I came back home to Dallas and I worked at the Richards Group for about 7 years. And now I'm at Fleishman Hillard, where I'm a director of media relations and reputation management.
And I'm Brian. I'm, as Trent mentioned, also a North Texas graduate. I went the radio, TV, film route while at UNT. And right out of school, I ended up working in broadcasting in the Dallas market, radio and television for about 10 years, KRLD and a couple of other stops. Then jumped over to the public relations side and worked in college athletics at University of North Texas, a couple of other places, NCAA conference offices. Ended up with a public relations agency and stayed there for about 7 years. Worked for a book publishing company doing public relations for a year. And about 4 years ago, after all of that, I decided to go out on my own. And so I started my own company. And I've been in PR for about 30 years after I left my 10 years of broadcasting.
Everyone, I'm Marvin Singleton. Have been in the business through a couple different areas. I started off in the campaign world working for Ross Perot for both of his presidential campaigns, and those were daily crises that we'll get into. I was part of a startup airline, wanted to turn my hat over to actually doing some work. And then for the last 19 years, I've been with two different agencies, both owned by WPP, currently reside in Dallas with Hill & Knowlton Strategies.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. As you can see, we've got quite the experience levels and the depth of experience in this field, and really excited to kind of get into the questions today and learn more from you all. So let's just go ahead and get started. So for the students that are here, and some of those that may be watching this, because this is recorded and it will be available to the students later on, but for those looking to get into a career in PR and maybe even specifically focusing on crisis, what do you guys feel like is the most important quality for students to have coming out of school into this field? And then if that quality is so important, how can they cultivate that quality now as they are in their latter years or getting ready to graduate? How can they make sure that they have that quality in spades when they graduate? Whoever wants to go first.
Sure. Oh,
Kurt and then Marvin.
Okay. It sounds really funny, but some of the best skills you can have as a PR professional working in crisis is being able to read really well and write really good. Understanding a news cycle is so very important for our business, because you need to know how your client can be covered. You need to know how you insert yourself into coverage, and you know how things can play out. And writing is just a really great background. I mean, writing helps you with a press release, helps you with social media, helps with communication. It's just, I think reading and writing, those two skills that I think that will always get you there. I definitely think one of the questions I always ask people when they're applying for internships is, what are the top 3 news stories that you saw today? And you'd be amazed by how many people do not know that. And I think that understanding the world that you live in and what makes news and what is news is such just a good basic and a background for this industry.
To add to what Kurt said, think about this as critical thinking. So being able to take what you read and what you write, but also to think, what else could happen? What else do I need to be thinking about? Because sometimes we've all focused on what's at hand, but someone needs to say, have we thought about how this may impact? The second quality, and this is a learned one that you can do right now, is flexibility. A crisis never happens on a Monday to Friday from 8 to 5. And so sometimes you're going to get to call late at night. You may have to get in the airplane at 6 in the morning. And so it's an experience that is rewarding because you learn a lot, but you've got to be flexible. And the last thing I would say is endurance. Just like in a campaign where you wake up every day thinking about what are you doing this day, this is a sprint and a marathon. But going back, it all starts with being able to read and write and the critical thinking, because they need different people in the room as they're talking about what may happen. And you don't want a bunch of people to rubber stamp, this is what we should do. You want other people thinking outside the box.
And I'll kind of dovetail into what Marvin and Kurt are saying about what we can do right now. You'll find that once you get into working with crisis situations, that some of the big elements that will be great to develop right now is become a good listener. You'll need to listen to your clients and what their issues are, and then you're going to need to be able to take that and discern from it what will be the next approach. How are we going to respond from that? So to be calculated in your response. We live in the day and age of social media. In the old days, we had 24 hours to respond to a crisis. Now we have 15 minutes to respond to something, and it's because of social media. So developing good skills on what you say on social media, maybe now, how you react to things. I think Kurt or Marvin mentioned, what stories are you following, and what would you see that they might turn into, and how would you respond? So having good calculation, being a calculated listener and a calculated consumer of news stories will help you develop how you're going to respond to that for your client.
That's good. Good feedback. Second question, what do you guys feel like what are the various roles and responsibilities that are needed in crisis? What are some of the things that, as students are looking to get into this particular area of public relations, like what are the different roles and responsibilities that exist in this field?
I'll jump in there
Okay.
just to start the conversation. When a crisis starts to develop for your client, there's obviously going to need to be someone from the PR team, whether that is internally, if a company or your client has an internal public relations person or staff, or externally, if it's a company that's advising the client. There needs to be someone in charge. So that's going to be the point person that's going to help develop what will be the response and the timing of the response. So that's one role, is your PR lead or your PR connection. Obviously, another role is going to be the spokesperson from the company. The PR person many times will be able to handle some of the media inquiries, but there's going to have to be someone more than likely from the company that will have to make a statement or have to be the face of what's going to be the response. And so there's that person who's going to require some training and from the PR team and some background. Then it'll trickle on down primarily on the PR side of the support staff. So there'll be researchers who'll need to develop background information that's going to help develop what the team's response is going to be. Certainly social media. Again, I get back to that. Whoever is monitoring and whoever is going to manage the social media aspect of the response, that will be a key component of the reaction team. So you'll have a PR lead, you'll have the spokesperson from the company, and your social media are three pretty integral parts, I think, of the crisis team that will be a part of the response.
To add to what Brian said, I think that one of the unknowns that you may not anticipate, but sometimes when you're in a crisis, everybody wants to be looking online or watching TV or doing something, and you can take that away by having a strong media monitoring. So for those of you that are learning how to track things, that becomes then the daily or the hourly or certain headline driven of traditional and online. So there's a big role for the media monitoring as part of any crisis, and that minimizes people's times and distractions. There's also another title that you don't really learn at school, but is something in reality, what I'd call a training engineer or a project manager. So someone who is right beside that number one, who's going to be driving the deadlines, who is going to be setting up meetings, either with the various people that need to be involved with, as well as driving the reports. So there is a project management aspect to a crisis that is critical, because as Brian mentioned, that it used to be 24 hours, now it's 15 minutes on a good day. I'd also suggest that there needs to be some editors, because people are going to be moving fast and trying to get it out. And sometimes they are always not auto spell. So you've got to have a group of people who are sitting there quality checking everything that's either going to be put out on the statement, on the website, on the social media. And that is a critical function as well. That's something you can learn right now, be it AP style or other, just going back to what Kurt said, the last question, being able to consistently write. And then lastly, I would say that, there's an opportunity based on the situation to have a subject matter expert. So if you're in your career knowing about a certain thing, there's a role for that. So you don't always have to be the one that speaks to the media, but you're going to be asked upon for your smarts and your knowledge about what that topic is.
Great. It's interesting because as I listen to your guys' background and then we start talking about crisis, it seems to me that crisis is not like you guys didn't go to school or get into PR because you wanted to focus on crisis. At least I don't think that was the case. But it's a segment of what you do or what you have done. Talk a little bit about how crisis is part of a bigger sort of PR operation, and then how much time is crisis on your end, or the people that focus on crisis, versus some of the other things that you get an opportunity to do in the PR world that have are more proactive, I guess, than reactive. And you could argue that crisis is oftentimes proactive as well. So
I'll take the first stab at this one.
Okay.
No, not everyone probably goes into PR to do a crisis. Sometimes you become a crisis guru from just day-to-day working in the industry. I think that's how I fell into it. I worked in the political world, and And so we definitely had a crisis a lot. And so I felt like I was able to hone my skills doing that. But what I would say is when you have the chance to learn crisis, like early in your career, jump at it, because once you're an expert there, you'll always be in demand. Right now at Fleshman, we even have it to where we have, I guess, certified people in crisis, to where when we do have a crisis in the network, we bring those people in. So we're sought after as counselors because we understand a crisis, can work a crisis. And we're even involved a lot of times in the front end, even when there's not a crisis, because a lot of times somebody experiences that area, the way we look at something, that's how you avoid a crisis. So I would definitely say when you have the opportunity to learn more about it, get into it, jump into it, you'll be in demand, because I don't think crises are going away anytime soon.
Can I chime in and ask a follow-up on that one? So new student coming in, have an opportunity to work at this great PR firm, super excited, not necessarily working in crisis, but I'm doing whatever it is that I'm doing. I see the people in crisis, running around and doing their stuff and staying till midnight and, doing 48-hour days and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of scary over there in the crisis world. How do you take that down? Because I hear you, Kurt, saying if you get an opportunity, jump at it, but it sounds kind of scary. How do they get over that concern or that scariness of crisis to dive into it and really sort of embrace it?
I think you look to the area where you can pitch in, where you feel comfortable. I think areas also to where you can take some ownership of it. I definitely think that I think we mentioned earlier that how much crisis has evolved because of social media. And like Marvin was saying, monitoring is so very important. Like, can I monitor social media for this crisis? Can I keep y'all abreast of what's going on? And I think, I'm not saying I'm old, everybody on this call is old, but I think that people with experience love it when a younger person jumps in on social media to really help them tackle that, understand that, follow the conversation. So I think that's an easy way to get involved is I can monitor this for you and I can send you a report or I can talk to you in person. I think finds an easy way to jump in and own it.
Trina, if I could jump in, there's something as a precursor to a crisis. An issue is a fire drill of the day. Something happened, it's a one and done, it's over. So as part of a normal client mix, if you're on an agency world, you have those and you learn from that and you can participate. A true crisis is what can impact the brand's reputation. So think about it going from a small fire to a very big fire. And so you can learn and practice and get part of client teams, or if you're in a company setting, managing those day-to-day media challenges or social media challenges that are issues. And then from that, you can pivot into the crisis as those become big and reputational. There's an example every day. So I think, without a show of hands, if you were to look at how many people are watching Facebook with what's going on, that went from an issue to a crisis really quick once all the newspapers started coming out. So how are people involved from the issues on that supporting Facebook, or if you're inside, to something that's now reputationally damaging and impacting their stock price?
And I'll jump in and add one more thing to what Marvin's line of thinking is about brand reputation. That is one of the biggest key components when managing a crisis, is how to protect the reputation of the brand. And then, as we're all, the three of us are pretty seasoned PR veterans, and there's something weird, I guess, about us that it's, aside from the day-to-day PR demands, when a crisis hits, there's something about the juices start to flow, and it's like, it's a baseball player. You're at the World Series all of a sudden. Not, and sometimes it's not in a positive way, but there's just something that kicks in. It's the magic of the moment. You really feel like, okay, now all my skills, this is what I was meant to do, help my client in this sort of way. Things are happening really quickly, so you're having to make good decisions with your team around you. But it's those moments. I don't sit around thinking, man, I wish I had a crisis today so I could get really excited. It's not that, but it's those moments, because many of us, when we're managing our clients' PR, it's day to day. You're trying to do your regular brand promoting and press trips or pitching stories and that kind of thing. And then when a crisis happens, I think that's when the best of the PR people step up to the plate. when their skills, when their experience really shows. I'll give you two quick examples just from my experience. I worked at Texas Motor Speedway for 7 years on the media relations team. And so, my job was to help promote the races, the NASCAR races, the IndyCar races, and that was our day-to-day thing. But, and this was early on in my career at the Speedway, we had what was one of the biggest fears you could have. We had a very bad incident on track during one of the races, and one of the drivers, there was a fatality. And so there, all of a sudden, a crisis immediately faced us as the PR team. How do we handle that? There's just so many elements to deal with. There's the family of the driver. There's the whole NASCAR race community. There's the public, and then there's the media. And so we had to quickly, you go from I'm covering a race to 5 minutes later, I'm covering a race crisis. And my job was at the infield care center. So I'm right there where it's happening. And we're having to immediately make decisions on, as the media pretty much converged quickly, what to say, who's going to say it. Do we turn it over to the medical people at the hospital where this driver is being transported, on and on and on. So a lot of decisions had to be made. You want to protect the driver's privacy, their family, the race team, the NASCAR brand. Something like this obviously is never good for a brand like that. So we had to make a lot of quick decisions and hold a press conference in the infield media center, say the right things, draft statements. But it's something that all happens very quickly. And I think, that's kind of what we're made to do, and protect everybody, to protect and tell the story and be fair with the medias too. They have a job there to do as well, but to be fair. And then the other example, there was that one, and that was probably the most stark one that I had to deal with. But when I worked for a PR agency, it was in the tourism industry in New Mexico. I'll just throw that out there. It was the year they were having the terrible forest fires in New Mexico, and it was ravaging the state. Well, our clients were concerned, what is this going to do for the travel industry? Are people going to be afraid to travel to New Mexico? And unfortunately, the stories were swirling into the national media that you should not go to New Mexico. It is not safe. And it looked like, if you followed some of the national media, that the whole state was on fire. But that was not the case. The actual story was the fires were very isolated and very controlled to certain parts of the area, and most of those were not anywhere near the tourist areas and the ones that we represent. So the story needed to get out that it is safe to go to these places. Those fires are in remote areas, and that was our job. Quickly get together with our client, fashion a statement, get the word out that it is safe to travel, and so that people would not panic and say, well, I can't go there, and redirect that national story that while the fires are a serious story, the travel industry in the state is okay. And so that was something we had to do within just a few days.
Good. And I think that, as opposed to maybe talking about how the role chose you, it's kind of interesting to hear some of these stories of how you all have navigated very specific crisis in your career. So Ryan, thanks for those couple of examples. Marvin or Kurt, do you guys have an example of some crises that you guys have navigated, and your role and some of the things you guys had to do through those?
Sometimes when you're in the agency world, you have clients where you have to prepare and train for a crisis. And for the last 8 years, I've slept with my phone next to me every night, hoping I don't get a phone call from a client because it's an airline. So we have to develop a crisis communications manual. They're in a regulated business, so the FAA, DOT get to see this. And before COVID, we would have with the client quarterly trainings where we put their speakers through media training. Here's the script. We've pre-written 14 different examples of what could happen based on the life cycle of that crisis. We've had to create a dark website should there be an accident. And now we have social media as well. Thinking about that, we've had to go and all the 60 markets where that airline flies, one of our colleagues goes with an airline person to meet the airport director so that we go through, okay, what happens? Where do you go for the press conference? Where do you send the grieving families? Where do you do this? So it is a crisis. It's never happened. Knock on wood, I don't get the phone call, but it is something that's part of a daily, we have to help and support our airline. That's our client.
Kurt, any examples of navigating a crisis on your end?
Yeah, a few examples. I have in my past, I worked for the nation's largest provider of social services. And they're known for the work they do around Christmas time, but they have probably a history of not being as open and acceptable to the LGBTQ community. And so it happens every year. So I learned basically around Thanksgiving, get ready for the blow, get ready for the crisis to come our direction. Like Marvin, I think it is so important to keep your client and yourself trained and ready for a crisis. Always have statements at the ready, have a process down, have a formula down, have a way you do it down. So that's one thing I've learned working in crisis is to always stay trained, stay prepared, and get a process and a team together so you know when to jump into action when you have to. So I think that's one thing I've learned that I try to keep close to myself is be prepared and have my process ready.
Good stuff. What do you all think is the most rewarding thing about working in crisis, whether that's going through it, successfully navigating it to the other side? What is the reward?
I think Brian touched on it. It's adrenaline. In a situation where it's moving fast to see something, but then also it's the results are immediate. So that if you do your job well, you've either addressed the situation, stopped the story, or been able to explain your side of the situation very quickly. So it's much more immediate than sitting there trying to pitch a product or something else. So those are what come to my mind.
I agree with that. I think there's some unintended benefits sometimes you can get from a crisis that I've experienced. Two things I think that are important. I think working with a team and learning that chemistry sometimes you can really learn your team through a crisis because you're in that ditch together. So I think that's a positive I've gotten out of it. And also a positive I've gotten is reporters in the media that cover crises, that happen, they're kind of everywhere. People can jump their beats to cover like breaking news. And so I've been able to build relationships that way. I have reporters that, yes, I did work on this complicated issue with, but actually they covered education. I have education clients, now I talk to them on a regular because of that. So I think the team chemistry you can get and the networking you get, because everyone wants to be involved in a crisis, is some unintended benefits that you can get out of it.
And I think it also can improve the relationship with your client. On a day-to-day basis, we're going about pitching stories for them, trying to just promote their brand in the normal sort of PR agency or PR representative sort of way. And then a crisis breaks out. And if we can positively manage that and keep the brand reputation in place and everybody comes out looking positive, or as Marvin mentioned, maybe redirect the media story to maybe not be as damaging or completely go to a different direction. After it's all said and done and we get through with it, then I think the client looks back on that and can see the efforts that we did and stepped in a little different sort of way than we normally do on a day-to-day basis. And all of a sudden, now we have a stronger relationship with our client. They see us as a very much more valued entity that they're already working with, and probably increases the ability that the client gives the PR agency or the PR rep that, okay, I have more trust than I ever had before because you handle this crisis as well. So I think it improves that a lot.
You all may have answered this question, but in general, do you see, you probably have answered it, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you see more of this and a bigger need for this profession now than ever before? Is it increased, and what is the reason for that?
say yes to all the above.
And it's because,
I think businesses in their normal course of operations always get tripped up. So there's always a need. Crises will not go away. Can you predict them? No. Can you build a business around them? Kind of, but you can't really plan for the future of what it is. So you have to be nimble enough to be accommodating when it does happen. But crises are not going away. Issues, incidents, leadership, you name it, there's always going to be a problem that someone needs help.
And I think that I agree with everything you said there, Marvin, that this is not going away. And while maybe in the old days, crisis was something that you kind of, as a PR professional, put on the back burner and like, okay, if that ever comes up, we'll figure out what to do about it. I think it's on the front burner now because, again, social media is just impacts so much, so many businesses, so many individuals of prominence that, I just go back to the statement of you have very little time to react to something that you want to try to protect that brand reputation and that image, that I think, as Marvin said, I don't think it'll ever go away. And I think companies will now, or should, put more and more emphasis on either retaining in-house public relations people that are equipped that can handle that, or have an association with an outside agency that is ready at any time to be able to respond to something like this, because it'll always be with us now. And so as a student, if I were going through North Texas right now or anywhere and prepping to go into the PR field, I would seriously try to do everything I could to be ready to learn more about the crisis communications world. And I think that's where internships while you're still a student is very valuable, especially with an agency that is working with crisis. You'll be exposed to it whether you're an intern. No matter what the position is, you're going to get the front desk exposure to it. So I don't think it's going away anytime soon. So I think it's on our front burner for a long time.
Mhm.
good, okay. And then how do you see the profession evolving in the next 5 to 10 years? What do you see? You anticipate there being some different needs within a crisis, or some other forms of communication that will continue to change? Obviously, you're not fortune tellers or future predictors or whatever, but what are your thoughts on the next 5 to 10 years for this side of public
I
relations?
think we've been hinting at it throughout this process on the evolution of it. And I think social media is going to continue to evolve crisis communication. We're seeing now that news moves from social to news now. I think social can drive a crisis or differently than regular news media can. There's been times I've been involved in a crisis, I didn't know I was in one, to somebody's like, did you see this was trending? And I was like, thank you for letting me know this. So I think that social is going to continue to evolve. I think what we see with cancel culture, what we see when it comes to, the change in our politics in America is going to change it right now. We're kind of polarized, divided right now. So I think social media and just the political landscape right now is probably going to be how this world unfolds or evolves the next 5 to 10 years.
I also see the response mechanisms also evolving. What I mean by that is we've talked a little bit about media monitoring reports. Some clients want instantaneous. So now we have to go create online dashboards that every time there does a pull, every 5 minutes, it refreshes what's been said in the last 5 minutes because of social media. I also think too, one of the things that we've seen is we do a third-party solution on a mobile phone. So every employee, should there be a crisis, here's the manual, here's what I'm supposed to do or say or go, here's my check-in. So we're seeing mobile apps now being developed to help companies address crises. And I also think too, the practice of your communications crisis plan as well. We've created a proprietary online tool where you sit in a room and it allows people to act like social media, so that here's a tweet, someone saying this, when all the executives are looking at their crisis manual, what do I do? What do I say? This is a way to test their crisis plan. And we instinctively also take people out of the room to help companies understand, well, if your general counsel isn't there to approve a statement, who's next in line? So it's that response mechanism is also going to be changing, because those are all relatively new, and there's going to be dozens more of that coming out to help companies, organizations, and individuals respond to it.
I think one thing that we're going to see, and maybe this should have been in place for a while, but I think every business of every size should be ready for a crisis and have, as Marvin was saying, some sort of crisis plan or crisis manual. It's some sort of organized effort to respond. You know, when we think about a crisis, we think, okay, well, that's going to happen to some large company and an airlines, a major manufacturer, something like that. Well, that's not necessarily the case, especially if it's your client. And I have clients from very small mom and pop restaurant type things up to larger ones. And so I think, you know, as a PR professional, whether you're going to work for a large agency or an independent professional or a small agency, I think you should probably be ready to prepare, or at least try to ensure that your client, and I'll just use, I have a small burger restaurant that does incredible business, but we've never, you know, he's never thought about what if something happens? What will that do to damage his business? And so we've talked a little bit about that, how to manage his social media response. What if something were to happen and then all of a sudden he gets all this negative feedback? So I think you're going to see, and I think as a PR professional, I've always tried to encourage all companies of all sizes that you really should have something in place. And I think as up and coming PR pros, that should be something that we really try to push to every client to think about, because it doesn't just happen to the big companies, it happens to the small ones, and it could be even more damaging to a small company. It could put them out of business.
Good, that's good. It also feels like, as you were talking about the future and, you know, things evolving and where things are going, as the values of society and the values of our culture continue to evolve and change, the things that they expect companies to do and be a part of change, and therefore sort of opening the door for the potential for more crisis opportunities depending on where that company happens to fall. I was reading an article that was talking about, will fossil fuels become the next smoking? At least I'm in the advertising business, so it's like, you know, at one point back in the day, you know, people put a lot of pressure on folks who had tobacco accounts and cigarette accounts because it was so bad for you. And now they're talking about maybe heading into the area of fossil fuels. If Chevron is one of your accounts, or Shell or somebody like that, it may be not cool to have those on your list. And so as things start to change, then things that were formerly, you know, at one point okay or not okay. So just trying to help manage all of that and stay up to speed. I think the students coming out today are some of the folks that are driving a lot of those important changes. How should they be thinking about managing and connecting their values with some of these organizations and groups that they're wanting to be a part of? If that makes sense.
I think that's a great point, Trent, and because so many companies are positioning themselves with their value-driven companies, or here are our values, and so they're going to be held to task on that. Their feet are going to be held to the fire about who they say they are, and how they respond. And I think it's important for companies to have good counsel from PR about when and where to weigh in on topics on either social media or however they would weigh in, and to make sure it's a calculated one, but that they, they should weigh in on and really know what the response might be, or what their voice, if they do weigh in on something, what their voice will and how it will impact people. Just a quick example, and I won't be able to give explicit names, but you can kind of sometimes avoid a crisis before it happens if you can counsel your client. We did have one that was a major automobile part producer in the United States. And so they wanted to, or the CEO, you'll appreciate this, Kurt, it was during a political year, one of the national campaign years. He wanted to weigh in and wanted to make a contribution to a particular campaign. But even though the campaign probably aligned with their company values, we felt as a PR team that it would alienate a large customer base of theirs. Because we tried, and so we had a lot of discussion about this with the company about, we know you believe strongly about this. We know this is what you want to do. We know your company values are this, but you have customers across the country that have all kinds of beliefs. Are you willing to alienate a certain customer base because of this action? And be careful if you do, because there could be some serious consequences. And so that went on for a while, and we were able to get them to back down, I guess is the best way to say it, is that would not be prudent for the company in the long run. It might make you feel good as the CEO. It might align with some of your customers, but not all of them. And so you always have to have that in the back of your mind, is how are your customers going to react to something like that? And so we were able to avoid what could have been.
And I hope I'm sorry. I'm hoping I'm adding to this in the right way. I think that you have to also consider your values and your ethics when working in crisis, because one thing I've learned the hard way, which I now definitely always put first, if I don't believe in something, I'm probably not going to do as good a job as I could. If I don't believe that if someone did something where I think it's bad myself and they shouldn't have done it, it's really hard to get them out that mess. Yeah. So I've learned putting your values and ethics in this industry is so very important. You do better work, you push harder, and you get a better result. So I think always think about your value and ethics when you look at a job. Look at their client list. If they represent somebody you don't like, you probably shouldn't work there.
I absolutely agree with that. You're right.
And Trent, to your opening question about how do students get involved, I think if you look at over the last couple of years, certain companies have been out the forefront, and they're mostly consumer. So if you think of what Levi Strauss did as a consumer company several years ago, they were out in front before 2020, where we had all sorts of issues, societal, race, and other areas. So if you look at the companies that are really pushing it, think about Patagonia, where they said they're going to close on Thanksgiving and Black Friday because they didn't want their employees. And they said, go outside. So as you see these companies that may have more marketing that's reflected through their communications as well, the generation that are students are the ones that are pushing it. And it starts with the consumer brands. Corporations that may be more business to business, that may have not had to think about it, they're too late to the game if they haven't already thought about it. So in the last year, really helping a lot of companies that may not have thought, well, I'm going to get boycotted because we don't have any consumers, direct to consumers. And that's not the case. It's now your employees or your vendors or your suppliers or those that in the communities you work with. Is that a place you really want to be known to? I work here. So it's changing and quicker than you might anticipate.
Sure. So as a student, in the journalism school, there's advertising, there's PR, there's broadcast, there's photojournalism. Maybe have all sorts of different folks that may watch this or be on the call today. They're listening and they're like, there's something in here that I'm kind of interested in, but not sure exactly. How do I know if this career, PR, and maybe even specifically crisis, how do I know that this career might be a right one for me? Maybe I was thinking about advertising, but there's something about this that's interesting. What qualities within me make me potentially a great person for this profession?
I'll jump on this. I still don't know what I'm doing in my career. I was a history and poli-sci major, but I'm enjoying what I do. And I tell people as they are having reflections, especially after this last year, where is this the right thing? Do you enjoy it? Do you truly wake up every day? Because if you don't like it and you're waking up in grimace, this may not be it. But however, if you like the people that you work with and doing the activities you are, then this is it. It's more of a feeling. And if you're doing well, you're going to be recognized by your managers, your company, or whoever you're supporting, that you're doing well in your career and you're moving forward. So for me, it's more of a feeling versus an actual, did I get this title by this time period, but more of, are you really enjoying it? Is that your passion? Sounds contrite, but that's where I am.
Well, for me, I thought I would be a radio disc jockey for all my life, and that's what I went to school at North Texas for. I worked at KNTU. I went through radio, TV, film. I was dead set. I'm going to be an on-air jock. Well, I did end up working in radio, but it was sports broadcasting. But in the 7-8 years in Dallas working in broadcasting, I found that probably my real strength was more behind the scenes, organizing things, producing radio shows, managing things. So I kind of found that those are going to be my strengths. And then I had an opportunity presented to me. I'd never worked in public relations, so it kind of came out of the blue to jump over from KRLD to a PR opportunity. And I thought, yeah, I can probably do that. And that was 30 years ago. But I think as I look back, the strengths of being able to be calm under pressure, organized, being able to be calculated and analytical and looking at things, all of which I used in my broadcast career, has now really flourished over 30 years, that I use those qualities a lot. I never thought I would work in public relations, and maybe I still think I'll be a DJ someday, but I've got 30 years in it, and so I'm not giving up on it now.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to welcome Teresa Kuchner. She's my fellow board member and fellow committee team member on the education committee. So we are kind of splitting these seminars up. So she had a conflict at the beginning, but said she was going to join here at the end. And in the last 10 minutes or so that we have, I want to invite the students that are on the call to ask any questions, perhaps take your put yourself on video and ask some questions while we've got these great professionals online about what they do, how they got into it, some things that you may need to be thinking about or studying now, how to do internships. I'm not sure exactly what questions you might have, but want to open the floor up for you all to have a sort of a direct line with these professionals. I introduced Teresa before that because she always has a good question or two sometimes. So in case she wanted to be the first questioner.
I did, but I want to make sure the students get a chance to ask. Okay, I'm going to ask this, guys. This is about crisis management. And it seems today that everything is a crisis. This morning, I must have gotten breaking news quotes a dozen times for things I didn't consider breaking news. Crisis kind of falls in the same capacity. How do you treat that when you're with a client and they think the world is coming apart because of some social media stuff? What is it that you do to settle them down?
To settle a client down, I think sometimes you have to help them take it back. You have to remember that they take it much more personal because it is them. So sometimes I think you have a unique role when you work in an agency setting like I do, because sometimes I have 4 or 5 clients. And so I have to be able to kind of, in a nice way, let them know like, okay, this is your problem that you're having, but let's look at the grand scheme of the world today. How is what you're handling, how is it really, affecting things? Is it making news headlines in your local paper, national paper, is it on social media? I think it's to let them see the broader picture sometimes to see how it's truly impacting things.
That's good. Brian or
Well,
Marvin?
I was going to say that part of our job for Kurt, Brian, and I, who've been in this for a while, is you don't know this, but you have to be a psychologist when you're in the agency world, and you have to help your client, much like Kurt said.
Yeah. Yeah.
And part of it is helping them help themselves understand. And as Kurt said, tell us about how you think this is going to impact the story. Does this impact your reputation? Was this just you're mad about something because they'd misquoted you, or one of your competitors said something about you? Does it truly move the needle? So part of it is hopefully the client relationship. They trust you, and you build the relationship so that you can go to them and say, settle down, this will blow over, or it's not a big deal, or you're right, it's nuclear, let's go jump on it.
And I agree with Kurt and Marvin are totally correct on that. I mean, we spend an enormous amount of time being a counselor to clients. And
you call it counselor, I call it psychologist in certain
yeah, that's right. It's a fine line there. I think you're probably closer to correct on that. But and a lot of clients think also every idea they have, everything they have is also a breaking news story, not a crisis, but a news story. And you have to tell them, well, no one in the news media is going to find that interesting other than me who's listening, and I'm, you're paying me, and so I have to listen. But the news media is going to say, yeah, well, how does that impact the public? That's just something you as a company are doing. So we have to counsel them on what's newsworthy. And on a crisis, just as Marvin and Kurt were saying, a lot of times it doesn't require a response from the company, either on social media or to the media. It requires just, let's all get together as a PR team and your internal team, and let's discuss what happened, what's the outcome, what's the fallout. Is there any brand damage that we need to talk about publicly? Or is this, as Marvin said, is everybody just upset about something? And maybe we can walk that through. So yeah, PR reps play a large role in that. I think it's just talking the client down off the high wire.
Off the ledge, right?
Off the ledge, talking them down off the ledge a few times. And then you go back to doing what you're doing.
And I think Brian brought up a really good point just now. Sometimes issuing a response when no response is needed can create the crises. I've had clients,
Exactly.
It was not a big issue, like it was bothering you, no one else. They responded, and then they end up basically creating a culture or a group of influencers on social media to get pissed off at them, and it create a firestorm. So sometimes you have to know, sometimes a response is, you don't always have to. So know that you can also incite the flame when you respond when not needed. So that's something I've learned.
There's a euphemism that we have, which is when you're in a crisis, put the shovel away, stop digging the hole deeper.
That is
outstanding.
Wonderful. That's outstanding. Yeah, it seems that today everything is that tinderbox. So you mentioned psychology, you mentioned counseling. Tell these students what other things they need to take to be prepared to deal with these kinds of things in PR. Any other kinds of classes that you think would be valuable to them?
I don't know necessarily it's a class, but I don't know if this is the way I got into PR or got into crises. I think you have to really use the role of a student to say you are a student. I got my first internship because I was a part of PRSSA at UNT. And so we planned a tour to all the agencies in Dallas-Fort Worth. And so we were able to get those one-on-one connections with the people who were hiring at different agencies. And that's how, because of that first agency job I got, is where I am today. So I think that if you're not using your role and your title as a student right now to get your first foot in there, you're missing out. Because even though I'm busy sometimes, if I see a student reaching out to me, especially from like UNT or a school around here, okay, like I may groan, but I will answer the call, I will answer the email, I will at least forward the email to somebody. So use that ability to guilt somebody while you're a student. Use it while you can, because once you're my age, you can't guilt somebody to get a job because you're a student. Use it while you can.
That's great advice.
And I agree with that. I think I go back to where we started. I think our conversation about how important it is to be a good writer. So taking any kind of classes that really hones your writing of press releases, of statements, or anything like that, that you will come across and that will be part of your task. in being able to write well, because when the crisis happens, whatever the message is that is going to go out is going to have to be very accurately and precisely and effectively written to get whatever message you want. And then to echo what Kurt says, if you're not already involved in the the PRSSA of PRSA Dallas, I would highly encourage that, because that's where you're going to get exposed to all the contacts you're going to want to have when you're looking for a job or an internship. And to just follow up on what Kurt said, was if you could get an internship with an agency that is doing a lot of different things, more than likely they're involved in crisis communications, and you're going to get a front row seat to how that all plays out, and see if you really like that and want to jump in.
It's fantastic.
One of the other classes, if available, is an introductory to data. A lot of what we do is the spoken word, the written word, but the future is understanding data. The larger the company you either work for or has a client, they love their data, and you got to slice it, dice it, and be able to know and understand it. You don't have to be the expert, and you can use Tableau to make it dance, although that's good. But being able to understand and not be afraid, it's kind of like before you use Excel, what is this thing? It's got boxes and stuff, but once you figure out how to use it to your advantage, it will make you a better communicator to understand this is resonating, this message is moving the needle on what we need to do, but you got to be able to understand how to move the needle.
Very good.
Maybe if
I didn't put him up to that, Trent.
No.
Well,
That's her background.
Thank you,
data.
Marvin, for that question. That's my background.
You guys forgot the psychology classes as well, right? Like
And that.
Take
college,
take 4 years of that if you can.
One of my favorite classes, I was organizational behavior. So it was in the B school, but it was more about the psychology and why some company leaders are able to walk the talk, whereas some may be brilliant and smart, but fall flat. So it is a psychology, but it's also about understanding organizational behavior.
Yeah,
That's a great idea.
I was saying that a little facetiously, but psychology and sociology to a certain degree, just understanding society and how societies all seem like they could be valuable in that profession. So, all right. Well, I want to thank you all for your time today. Brian, Kurt, Marvin, thank you for volunteering and coming and signing up and giving these students some insight into your vast knowledge and wisdom. We really appreciate it. Thank you for being one of our Mayborn mentors. We really thank you. And again, these are recorded, so there'll be a lot of people that will benefit from these sessions even after we're done today. So Tammy, is there anything else we need to say before we leave today?
No, I don't think so, other than the next Mayborn event is Thursday, November the 4th at 11 on political communication. So hope you guys students can come back and join us for that one. It'll be great as well.
Thank you very much, Brian, Kurt, and Marvin. We really appreciate it.
And we appreciate what you do. This is great that y'all have this series.
Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it. Thank
Thanks
you
so much.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
everyone.
Bye.